ما هم میکنیم.
Okay, good.
اوکی.
Okay.
مهندس چون اینا رو همه رو کلاد داریم، با اجازهتون من روی کلاد الان زدم که
نه that's good.
مرسی.
خیلی خوب. خب دوستان عزیز، خوشبخت هستیم و خوشحال از این که یک آقای مهندس مهدی کجباف، جوانی که از یه طرف خوشحالتر از این که نسل جوان به انجمن مهندس علاقه داره، مهربانی داره و خوش آمد میگیم با آقای مهندس مهدی کجباف و ابراز خوشحالی میکنیم از اینکه ایشون برای ما امروز سخنان جلسه ما خواهند بود. من از خانم مهندس سیمین سپهری خواهش میکنم که بایو مختصری از ایشون رو برای ما بخونن تا ما یواش یواش وارد متن سخنان میشیم. خانم سپهری بفرمایید.
خواهش میکنم. درود و سلام خدمت همه دوستان و عزیز و محترم کانون مهندس. خیلی ممنون از حضورتون و من سیمین سپهری از هیئت مدیره کانون مهندس هستم. افتخار دارم امروز مهمان عزیز و محترممون جناب آقای مهندس کجباف رو معرفی کنیم و موضوع سخنرانی ایشون using your core values to drive life changing goals هستش و باعث افتخار کانون مهندسه که ایشون رو در این جلسه داریم و حالا من مختصری از بیوگرافی ایشون رو براتون میخونم. Mr. Kajbaf is an entrepreneur, coach and ex-engineer. He completed his electrical engineering degree at the University of Waterloo and then changed paths by doing his MBA at the Schulich School of Business. From there, he co-founded a multi-million-dollar e-commerce store in Matchboard and more, and he has been helping people change their lives through coaching and facilitation. His mission is to support people in discovering their authentic self, and he's excited to share his framework that helped him to get their value-based goal setting. Value-based goal setting is a goal-setting framework that requires you to dig deep and investigate your core values. Core values dictate who you are and what is most important to you in life. They are key to driving big changes. خیلی خوشبختیم. به هر حال we are very happy to have you, Mr. Kajbaf, and please begin your talk when you are ready.
Merci. Thank you to everyone. من ببخشید یکم راحت دارم با انگلیسی, so you know most of the presentation will be in English.
That will be fine.
That's fine. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny you were doing the whole introduction, and I was thinking, you know, I went to Waterloo, I did electrical engineering, and I did the MBA, but you know, if I'm honest, what am I most famous for? For being Pisare Agay Kajbaf. Who everyone here, you know, my dad, I wouldn't be here without him, literally, obviously. So thank you, Dad. I guess you're out there right now as well, which is awesome. So it's very exciting for me to be here today with this group. I gave a speech, I think it was a few years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was, a few years ago, on time management. So it's the second time now that I'm here with Mohandes, and it's a real honor and a real privilege to be here. And yeah, I'm very excited about the talk. So we're going to talk about using your core values to drive life-changing goals. And in these seminars, I always keep it very interactive. And we have a pretty small group. I see about 19 people here today. So I'd love to, get your questions, get your comments all throughout the seminar. It doesn't have to be where I do, 45 minutes of talking and then it's a Q&A. So anytime in the presentation, sorry, one person I think is unmuted, but anytime during the presentation, you want to share your questions, your thoughts, feel free to do that. I like to keep it very interactive and easy that way. Actually, Diki, I think, is having their mic unmuted.
Okay, hold a second. آقای عزیزی همه رو unmute کنید لطفاً. بعد مهدی جان بعد خودتو unmute کن.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so it'll be a lot more fun if we learn from each other and you guys ask questions and we keep it interactive. Okay, so let's get started. So traditional goal setting, let's start with that. In traditional goal setting, the way that it's focused, right, is just like in this picture. It's what I Googled, goal setting images just to find a picture. And this is the first one that comes up. And I thought, perfect, because that is how we think about goals. We think of them as a target to aim at, as a destination, right? We think about it as getting from my current state, whatever that is, into some new state, some destination. And to get that goal, we have to cross the delta, right? The difference between what I have today, where I am today, and where I want to be. And so in that spirit of the traditional goal setting, there's a lot of very famous frameworks, and you might have learned about some of these before, like SMART goals, PACT goals, so many different acronyms, right? And I guess I can ask you just right there, anyone here heard of SMART goals before? Anyone ever done that process of, setting a goal for themselves using SMART or some other framework? How did that go for you? You can just share any goals that you might have set up using one of those frameworks. And I have the chat as well. Anyone done that before? Maybe, maybe not. So even if you haven't done it directly using something like SMART, we all set goals. We've set goals our entire lives, coming from our parents when we were kids. And now we probably give our children goals as well. It's the natural way of living life because, again, we are looking for growth. We are looking for change. So, for example, one of the goals that probably everybody in this room one day, if you think back, had was to become an engineer. Imagine when you were in high school, you wanted to get accepted into university to become an engineer. Now, in order to do that, you needed a certain average. So for myself, when I was studying back in high school here, my goal was to get into University of Waterloo. I know for Waterloo, I need a 90% average. And I knew that currently I had 85. So SMART goal, very specific. I need to get a 90% average. So SMART stands for specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and timely. So it was specific and it was action-oriented. I study physics, I study math. Obviously, I felt it was realistic. I was smart. My dad was an engineer. I kind of knew what it takes to get there. And it was a very timely thing. I had 4 months to get my grades up and go to and become an engineer. So that's the normal way of thinking about goals. I'm here. I want to get there. Here's my plan. And in that case, I was very, very successful, right? And it worked. We all have goals, in our personal lives. We want to get married. We want to be good fathers. We want to be good sons, good brothers. We want to expand our family. We want to, get healthier, fitness goals. There's no end to the kinds of goals that we want. But why is it that sometimes we are very successful in getting those goals and sometimes we are not? So I want to ask that question to everybody. What is one of the key things that allows you to be very successful in achieving a goal versus some other times when you weren't as successful?
Well, the goal should be realistic. Yeah? The goal should be achievable.
Yeah, that's a part of it for sure. What else? What else when you think about it? Sahar says perseverance, I think she means consistency. Okay. What else? What else? What about the goal itself will allow you to be successful or not?
Mehdi, can I make a comment? This is Reza speaking.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I would say when the objective, it's aligned with your passion, you have to have the passion for it. One word, passion. That's it.
Passion. Awesome. Yes, that's a huge part about that. There has to be that alignment, right? Mehran says, know your potential. Maybe actually what you want and not what's expected, what you want. Yeah, so awesome suggestion. So all of those things, I wrap them up and I think about it in terms of values, right? When I was successful in becoming an engineer, it wasn't because I put a SMART goal in place. That really wasn't the key thing. The key thing was that goal was aligned with my values. Now we used, Reza says passions, you can think of them kind of similarly. What values, right? I value education. I value pleasing my father. I value a solid career. This is me as a teenager, 17 years old. I value competition. I want to be, the top of my class. And so because I have those values, the goal is aligned and I am successful in that. Now, the challenge is that in traditional goal setting, there isn't, and that's the question here I ask you, what's missing? The thing that's missing most often in traditional goal setting is that connection of the goal to your values. People skip that step and they just think about where they want to get to, where they want to be, And so a smart goal that isn't connected to your values is stupid. That's the way I look at it. A smart goal that isn't connected to your values ends up being a very stupid thing, and it ends up being a big waste of time. And that's what I've seen over dozens and dozens of seminars. I've done this with clients. I've done this in my coaching practice. And where people struggle and where they often fail in achieving their goals is that they never did the process. They never went through the process of considering what value is connected to that goal? What value is being represented in that goal? And so the way that I think about goals now, because, when I was coming up with this framework and when I was considering, how to present this topic, I thought about my past life. I thought about, where I've been successful, where I haven't been successful. And it was never about setting a target, but it was about living that goal every single day. Living in my values every single day so that I could achieve that. So eventually I would achieve that goal, but it's not that I'm trying to get to a certain place. It's more that I'm actually being a certain way. So it's sort of like, instead of trying to get to my goal, I'm being my goal every day. I'm not trying to become a student who gets 90%. I'm going to be the student who's a 90% student every day. So what does that mean? Well, it means I'm going to study more. I'm going to take the right classes. I'm going to be, dedicated to my craft. And that's the way that I think about goals. You flip it on its head. It's not about a destination. It's not about getting to a certain place. It's about being a certain way. And so I feel like that's where traditional goal setting really fails. It puts a lot of external motivation. It puts the objective far away and outside of you. And that can be demotivating, and that can be very difficult. So the way I think about it is bringing it inside. And so I talked about values. I'm going to be talking about values a lot today. But I want to ask you, before I even start talking about my definitions and what I think about it, how do you define values and how do they play a role in your life? This is an open question. How do you define values? Yeah, Sean is asking here, what is a value? So yeah, that's what I want. A code of ethics, that could be part of it for sure. What else? What goes into it? What are some of your values? That might help explain the definition as well.
It could be money, it could be success, reputation.
Yeah, those are some examples. So what connects all of those things?
Satisfaction in life. I mean, you need to be satisfied. Yeah. Enjoy what you do.
Mm-hmm. Value is value. It is sometimes in quantity form, sometimes quality. Sarah says, living your beliefs. So it's an important thing because we talk about values a lot. And I mentioned it earlier that one of the objectives of today, one of the takeaways of today, it's really an opportunity for you, for all of you out there today, to just take a moment and reflect and consider what are your values. I think it's a great thing to do every, few years, every few months, every day, even depending on how much you want to, is to really sit down and reflect and think, what are my values and how are they working for me or not? So what are values? My definition is your values are the source of all that you choose and do in life. They are what matter the most to you, and they determine your beliefs and actions. Values are everything. They are the root of everything. Or what I say, the source of everything. There's a really long list of values here. And this is how I start my coaching. Whenever I do a coaching relationship with someone, the first thing that we do is we sit down and we really try to investigate and discuss people's values, because that conversation tends to be very deep. It goes beyond the surface level stuff about, people's careers and, relationships and stuff. Sorry, I think we have again someone unmuted, but yeah, it goes beyond that, right? It goes beyond that surface level discussion.
So can we say it is the
Oh.
The person principles is the value. A person principles, a person main
Sorry,
principles.
Principles?
Yeah, every person principles is the value of a person.
Yes. That's like the rules that they live their life by can be a part of that. Yes, their principles are a big part of it. But people don't always know what they are. That's the funny thing is, and I've gone to these seminars and I've asked people, and I'm asking you now too. You don't have to answer this openly, but if you want to, please feel free to do it. Here's a big list, right? And if I ask you, what are the most important values on this list, or even outside of this list, could you answer? People usually, sometimes people immediately they know because they've done some work on this and they've, gone through the process and they know the things that they value most. For me, freedom, boom, I can tell you right away. And I will give you my stories about why freedom is important. Authenticity, those are like my core values. But a lot of times people don't go through that investigation. Or what they do is they pick values that they think they should have, right? So we're all, Iranian people here, I guess, and we all share some cultural values, things that I got from my dad and from my mom. Family is always a big part of pretty much all of our lives, I think. Family is a core thing that we grow up with, being respectful, being hardworking. These things are shared by most of us, and that's good, right? And that's fine. But the discussion really goes into what makes your values different than somebody else's. And that's where we start getting into the core values. So that's where people sometimes struggle. It's not just understanding. They can look at this list and they'll pick a bunch of them. And you might pick 10 that are one way and somebody else might pick 10 that are another way. And that's sort of the easy beginning part. What gets more difficult is when you start to drill down and discuss your core values, right? So that's the question I want to ask you first is, what's the difference between just your values, a long list like this, and your core values, of which I will say most people can only really have 2 to 3, approximately 2 to 3 core values. So if I asked you, what are your core values? Or if I asked you, what is the difference between a core value and a regular value? How would you answer that?
Well, the core values are the major values or the favorite values, but the others are just regular values.
Yeah, that's one. So they're like the most important values. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else? Another way you might describe the core values?
So you do whatever it takes to reach that goal based on those values.
Yes.
Those are the priorities, yeah.
You do it. They're like the top priority. You could think of it that way, right? They're the most highest priority ones that Ricky most motivated. So I would say that the core values are the ones that you can't live without. That's the way I think about core values. A lot of the things on this list, and you could have a lot of different lists of values, and I would pick 10, 20, 30 of them, and they're all important to me. But there's only a few that I really can't live without. And by can't live without, I don't mean that you're going to die. I mean that you can't live a fulfilled and completely satisfied life. And that's what we're all looking to do in our lives, right? We want to live fulfilled lives. And that's where core values become so, so important. And so that's the investigation that I encourage everyone to do, is not only to think about what your values are, but to really drill down and begin to think, what are my core values? And I mean, to do that, there are a few principles that I feel like are super important. The first one is to have an understanding of that question. Where do our values come from? So I open that up to you as well. Where do your values come from?
Family and education.
Family, education, for sure. What else? Where else do they come from?
And friends.
Mm-hmm.
Comes from the society, from the culture that you've grown up, from your beliefs.
Huge. Yep. Yep. I see people in the chat saying their nature. So all of these influences, right? All of these influences have an impact on what values we adopt. And I want to be clear here. Your values can't really be right or wrong in a moral sense, right? But they can serve you or not serve you. And that's more important. So think of it in that sense. Do my values serve me? Do they lead me to be more fulfilled, or do they not? You know, I think of it in that sense, not a right or wrong. But this question of where do values come from is a really tricky one, because you guys just listed a whole bunch of things, and there's even many, many more. But the bottom line is you can never 100% know where exactly you got the values that you have. And that can actually be a very exciting and freeing kind of thing, because in a way, if you don't know exactly where they came from, it also sort of means that you never really chose them in the first place, which also means that they can change. And that's my first step in terms of talking about core values, is to really drill down and get to a point where you understand that you are choosing the values, like to get to a point where you actually know that the values that you're living by are yours, that you believe in them, that they didn't just come from your parents or from, you know, society or all these other millions of influences. So that process of questioning and, you know, really sort of drilling deep into where did I come up with this belief? When did I choose that, I cared about education? When did I choose that hard work was going to be the most important core value? Is that what I actually believe? Or maybe what I want is to be more adventurous and more joyful. But the point is that you got to first be open. So that's the first part of the exercise, is just to become open to the idea that whatever values you have or you think you have are not the only ones out there for you. It's not the only option. So there's some humility in that, right? And it creates an opportunity. There's just enough doubt. And I really believe in self-doubt, in a way that self-doubt creates opportunities for learning. It never lets you get too comfortable. It never lets you think that you figured it all out, right? And so in that process of understanding where your values come from, there should be just enough doubt that you don't hold them sacred. They're not these mystical, sacred things, your values that can never change. So that's the first process, right? Really drilling down into that whole concept. And when you do, it allows you to be more honest about what your core values actually are. And then you can choose ones that really will make you happy in your life and fulfilled, as opposed to living by values that might be somebody else's. And that's hard. As I talk about it, it may sound like it's a very easy thing to do, but I go through in my coaching sessions with my clients weeks and weeks before we sometimes get to exactly what their true core values are, to get to something that resonates with them, that they believe in, that they're passionate about. It's not so simple as to say, oh, I value time. I value love. That might be your first instinct, but when you start to really process that, you begin to discover that, do I really value those things, or am I just doing that because it's the way I was raised? And I had to confront that in my life for sure. I'm not an engineer anymore, right? You know, I that was a big goal for me to become an engineer, and I
No,
pushed really hard to, you know, go to
no,
University of Waterloo.
no, you are engineer, Mehdi. You don't practice. You don't practice.
That's okay. That's also true. I'm not a practicing engineer. Um, but that was actually one of those important moments in my life, right? And I'm gonna talk about it in more detail. But I, to that point, really valued education. I valued being an engineer, and then I realized that I was doing it for sometimes the wrong reasons, and that it wasn't really me, and it wasn't really who I truly wanted to be. And when I discovered that, it was good because it allowed me to make changes in my life and go in another direction, which today I'm very thankful that I did. So it's not an easy thing. I don't want you to take it too lightly. You know, this is not something that you sit down for 5 minutes, write it on a piece of paper, and you're done. It's a whole process, and you have to question it and think about it, right? And, you know, one of the ways that you can do this, one of the things that really helps in trying to identify your core values is to think about a moment in your life. And I want you guys to all do this right now. Think about a moment in your life where you felt really fulfilled, satisfied, joyful, authentic. You felt very much yourself. You don't have to share this with me if you don't want, but do you have a moment like that in your mind? Do you have a moment maybe in your recent history? Maybe you have to go a little bit further back to find something that really resonates with you. And in that moment, think, what value was being present? What value was I expressing in that moment where I felt like I was being my best self? That's one way to help understand and kind of get on the path to discovering what the core values are. The flip side, also true. Think about moments where you were really frustrated, really angry. You felt wrong. You felt out of balance. What value was missing? What value was not present in that moment? And this is another way that you can help discover what your core values are. And Mehran asked the question, so I will answer it now. I was going to answer it a little bit later, but perfect timing. So for me, it was that second thing where I felt frustrated. And I'd been frustrated in my role as an engineer for about a year, and I didn't really understand why. You know, being an engineer was what I studied for 5 years, and I had a really good job. My job was in traffic control. So I would design these cabinets. Every intersection has a cabinet that controls the intersection, right? Makes the lights go red, yellow, green. And I've been working in this role for over a year, and it was good, but it didn't feel right. Something was missing, and I was frustrated. But there was a moment where I got really frustrated, and my boiling point had reached, and that's when it became more clear to me. I'd been thinking about values at that time, but I didn't have this framework. I didn't have this understanding. I didn't really know how to approach my issue, you know, but I was beginning to kind of get on that track. And it was a long weekend. And so at Econolite where I worked, every long weekend, they would let us out early. It was awesome. Like if we had Monday off, like Thanksgiving, Friday at 12 o'clock, we would go home and people would, you know, start their weekends early, and it was great. And, you know, if you know my dad, he loves his cottage, and going to the cottage was always a big deal for us. So this was Victoria Day long weekend. And I thought, okay, I'm going to get out early and I'm going to go to the cottage and it's going to be great. And 12 o'clock comes and I'm like, boss, can I go? You know? And he's like, well, we didn't get permission from our headquarters in Anaheim. And so we sat there, all of us in this office doing nothing, just talking and confused, and no one's really working. And we didn't get out till 5, like a normal day. And no one ever explained it to me. And I never really understood why I had to be there till 5. And in that process, I got angrier and angrier, and it clicked for me. It was like, the thing that I hate about this job is not the job itself, but it's just the fact that I'm not free in it. I felt like a kid that was locked in recess, right? And I felt powerless, and they took my even something as simple as just getting out a few hours early so I can avoid traffic. But it bugged me. It really, really bugged me. And in that moment, I saw very clearly that the core value of freedom, which I didn't even really understand that I had it until that moment, was not present in this job. And nothing about this lifestyle and that role was ever going to give it to me. And I also knew that if I didn't have freedom in my life, I was never going to be completely satisfied and fulfilled. And why didn't I discover it until then? Well, probably because I never really had a full-time job. With Waterloo, you go to co-op for 4 months, then you go to school for 4 months. And so you're always sort of like in a temporary state. But when you're in a full-time job, that's it. That's your life now, right? It's not going to change on its own. There's no natural end date. And so it was less about being an engineer. It was less about the work itself, but more about the fact that I was never, ever going to get the kind of freedom that I needed in my life. And so that was a very powerful moment for me. And so that's why I ask you to reflect on those moments where you do feel so angry and you feel frustrated and something is missing in your life, or conversely, when something is going great. Those are like really important moments to help identify what are the things that matter the most to you in your life. What are the things that you can't live without? And those are likely your core values.
Mehdi, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, of course.
Going back to the question Mehran asked earlier, the frustration that you mentioned indicated that you don't like engineering job. But how did you get motivated to start this type of job? Because that frustration means you need to start your own business. But what type of business and what the line of business didn't come from that frustration. So
I'm gonna build up to it and answer that question, but I want to be a little bit more clear, just to say that the thing that I discovered in that moment was that freedom was not an option in this job, because this job, I had a 9-to-5 job. You know, even if I had a little bit of freedom, it was never going to be enough. So at this point, all I could say was, I can't continue here. That is very difficult to find a career in engineering or most jobs that was going to allow me to have freedom. So that's where I was at this point. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I became an entrepreneur and a coach and that lifestyle, how it came to be. But it started first with this recognition that freedom is the core value that I must somehow discover in my life. And at that point, all I knew was it wasn't going to happen as an engineer, right? So I'll get to the other part afterwards. One other way, and this one's a little bit more dark, to be honest, but another way to kind of help, you know, recognize what is so important to you in your life. I know this is a little bit dark, I apologize, but to think about your funeral and imagine that you've passed away and you're at your funeral, you're in the casket and someone is giving a speech, the eulogy. They're giving a speech about your life. What would you like to be known for? What do you want people to describe you as? What values would you like them to say that this person lived in their life? So these are just different ways of kind of getting to the crux of what is the most important thing in our life, because only then can we set real goals. Only then can we start living our goals. We must first know who we are and what is important to us, and really, really important to us in an honest way. Not what society tells us, not what our friends tell us, not what our families tell us, but what we truly deeply believe. So at that point in my life, all I could really say was I was missing freedom, and that was really important to me. So I'll pause for a moment. I feel like, is there any other questions about things to this point, just what we've covered? I will get into some more details about how we can apply this, that, you know, but I want to know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I guess the freedom that you're talking about, that's the reason most of people wants to have like their own businesses, yeah. So, but the world is just kind of changing, and there are competition. So if you say like you want to set goals, like a short-term goals, like 3-4 years goal. So in this world that it's kind of fast-paced, changing world, so and there are lots of competition. How do you, what are the tools that you use to just reach that goals based on those values that you're saying?
Yeah.
Especially freedom.
Well, I know that when I speak to groups, usually that's a very big question, and I wish there was an easy answer. Truly, I wish there was an easy way to say, hey, if you want to start your own business, do A, B, C, and you're going to be successful. It's not that simple. There's a lot that has to go right. In my situation, I was very lucky. I'm very fortunate as well. I don't deny that. So I don't have like a simple, concise answer to that, to be honest with you. But I will explain how I did it from a values perspective a little bit further. I will explain that concept, and then maybe we can revisit it, and you can tell me if it answered your question or if it helped or not. But I know that's an important thing. I've seen a few questions around that, so I will address it. But I want to explain first really how important core values are. And then the next thing I'm getting to is about choices. And that's, if you want to talk about it in a general way, how do you become an entrepreneur? How do you be successful in your life? The general answer is you make good choices, right? And it's not one choice that you make in your life that will ever make you successful. It's not ever one big thing that changes your life. It's a lot of little choices. That's the culmination of, hundreds or thousands of little choices add up to create the life that you have. And this is something that I think is missing in our view of the world for a lot of people, is that they don't recognize the power of their choices. They don't recognize that they have choices. And so that's what changes things, is making better decisions. And these decisions are not, again, like I said, these big, massive kinds of decisions. They're simple decisions. Even like right now, it's a decision between, do I want to check my phone or do I want to pay attention in the seminar? That's a simple choice that we can make, all of us, in this second. When I wake up in the morning, do I get up and do 5 push-ups, or do I get up and go on my phone for 20 minutes? There's all these little choices that we make which add up. Now, what's hard is, number one, recognizing that we have choices, that we actually are making decisions every single day, even to the level of the words that we use, the thoughts that we have, the micro actions that we take. All of these things add up. So that's the first thing, is to understand that you do have choice every single day in your life. People who are really successful at achieving their goals understand that better. They understand that they are able to make lots of little choices that lead them to success. This chart here, I love this chart. It comes from a guy called Robert Fritz. And it ties in exactly with my philosophy around values and the importance of them in your choices. What's tricky is, at the bottom there, you see core values, and it's about your identity and who you are. I feel like one of the things that's missing in our view of choices and our way of making decisions is knowing that all of our decisions are rooted in some value. We're just it's not always visible. We don't always understand how that actually works, because we're living at the top level, right? We're living at the top level of our actions, our activities, our thoughts. We don't always know what value is driving that behavior, but there always is. There always is some value at the bottom there that is driving our belief, which is driving our thoughts and our actions. It's a really important concept, right? It's a really, really important idea. And I think, when I talk about setting goals, that's a big part of it, because earlier we talked about people setting goals without an understanding of what value is going to drive that goal. That's the part that's missing. But also in your day-to-day choices, can you relate those back to your values? That's challenging. It's not as easy as it seems. But every choice you make is a reflection of a value that you hold. Being a little bit more aware and reflective of that process is really important, because not only does it give you a deeper understanding of yourself and your motivations, it helps you to understand that you are constantly making choices. right? And so your values have a huge influence on your beliefs. So for examples of that, okay, so Sarah's asking for some examples of that. You know, even when you, for example, pick up your phone during a seminar like this, I don't know, it might be a little bit too close to heart right now, but you know, what value is that representing? It's indicating that my phone is more important than whatever it is I'm listening to. Now, you start drilling deeper into that, there could be many causes of that, right? There could be a lot of different reasons why that's true. On one level, it might be that, you know, you don't value the whatever is being told in this presentation for some reason. But on another level, it could be that there's, I don't know what value would be connected to, you know, that exact, that was a little bit trickier. That was a little bit trickier. But like, for example, when you get angry at someone, right? When you get angry at someone and you yell and you scream, which we've all done, right? That's at a higher level. That's a choice that we make, to yell and scream. Maybe on a deep, deep level, that's a reflection of our value to need to feel secure and safe. And it's just reflected in this way, right? It's tricky. It really does get tricky, and it gets a little bit difficult to manifest. Sorry, I wish I had some better examples. I mean, I could talk about the freedom one for myself, right? Is that when I chose to work on Mapboard and more, and chose to get into, you know, marketing and entrepreneurship, that was driven by my desire to be free. That could have also, I have partners, right? You know, I have two partners, my brother and my brother-in-law. And I've never really discussed exactly what their core value motivation of it was. I don't think it was freedom though, you know? For one of them, it might have been about security. Maybe that's what they were looking for. Maybe it was about control. Maybe it was about leadership. For me, the reason that I did all that was freedom. So that's kind of the way I can give an example. I know it's not the best, it's not the clearest, but that's kind of the idea, is that when you're making a choice, try to see what value is underpinning that choice. And you can go through it sort of in this way, right? There's the how, the what, the why. So the first thing about choice is that understand that we always have a choice and that it's rooted in our values. And the second thing is that we're always making choices, right? We're always making choices. Whether that's in how we think, how we feel, in our actions, there's always something that we are choosing. And even choosing to not choose, like not making a choice, is a choice as well, right? And that's at the most basic level. Achieving a goal comes down to knowing what you want. And that's what you do. You make a lot of little choices to achieve that goal. So that's another thing that I ask you to do, you know, is reflect on the choices that you make. And I'm not talking necessarily about the biggest choices that you made, about, you know, if you wanted to, you know, buy a house or move or get married. Those are like really big choices, and there's a lot tied to them. But start reflecting on the little choices that you make every day. What you do in the morning, what you eat for breakfast, you know, how you approach conversations with people, how you choose to, you know, what words do you use when you're talking to your husband or your wife or your kids? You know, whether you want to watch TV or exercise, and start seeing that in everything that you do in your life, you're always making a choice. And being successful at achieving your goal is about aligning your choices with your values. At the end of the day, that's the process. I'm going to make this more and more clear. I got a flow chart at the end that I think is going to really help explain the whole thing. But as a side note, what that is, right? That whole process of being more aware of our choices is mindfulness, right? So I'm not going to go into too much about mindfulness, but that's a key part about it, is being really aware of our choices. And the last thing about choices that's really important to understand is that they are emotionally charged. They're always emotionally charged. There's always a heavy element of emotion in it. So I'll share a story that illustrates this. And it was a cool thing. It's an old story, but it's a true story from a long time ago. So there was this guy, Elliot, and it's a very famous story. He was a lawyer, and he had a tumor in his head, like right behind his forehead. It was pretty big, you know, it was about the size of a small orange. So the doctors removed the tumor, and it was a very successful surgery. But they noticed that Elliot changed. His behavior changed. They say Elliot is no longer Elliot. But he was still intelligent. He still had his cognitive abilities. He had his logic, he had his reason, he had his memory. But his life fell apart. His wife left him, he lost his job, he became broke, and it was difficult for people to understand, like, what's happening. He seems to have all his faculties, but his life is falling apart. And as they talked to him, the neurologist talked to him, they realized that he was telling the story of his life, this tragic story of how he lost everything, but he didn't have any emotion tied to it. And so they realized that when they did the surgery, they severed the connection from his rational brain and his emotional brain. And so he basically wasn't processing emotions. And what that meant was he couldn't make decisions in his life. And that's what they discovered was really his big problem. Everything felt neutral to him. Even something as simple as scheduling the next appointment with the doctor, he had a whole bunch of reasons logically why this time would work and that time wouldn't work. And his whole life became a mess because he didn't have the emotional connection to the logical part of his brain to actually drive decision making. And if you think about it, that's the only way that we make decisions, is some emotional feeling that's going to push us to actually feel like that's the right choice. Even if you know it's the right choice, if you don't feel it's the right choice, you won't be pushed to action. So at the roots of all action also is our emotions. And that's something that we want to become more in touch with, understanding how our emotions are influencing our behaviors and our actions. So yeah, that's another part of this whole concept that's important. So, I bring this to light too, because a lot of times what we do when we struggle, imagine too, we don't know our own sort of process necessarily, where what value is driving our choices. We definitely have a much harder time getting visibility into other people's decision making and choices. We really only see the surface level. We can't understand how their values are influencing their behavior. So it's a very, very difficult thing. And what happens is that when people struggle with making decisions, like, for example, if people are struggling with their career, my first instinct when I was struggling with the job back to engineering days was to, try new projects, tell my boss I want to travel, I wanted new challenges. So I was, at that level, at the top level, right? At the strategy, the tactics, the activities. And I kept circling and trying different things and making different choices at that level. And it wasn't improving my life. Only when I started digging deeper and started making choices on the level of my values and on the level of my vision and purpose, and understanding how the role of freedom was playing a role in, was critical to me, only then did I start making the significant choices that actually made an impact. So when you're struggling with a choice, sometimes it's better to go deeper and try to see how the values are contributing to that choice versus going up and just trying different tactics and activities. So Sean here has a question. Is an example of firing someone in your firm, making a choice, how and what possible values are playing a role here? Sean, can you answer your own question? I'd be curious, because there's so many different ways of looking at that, right? And I think that's the process, is to understand what values are playing a role here. I mean, it could be something petty, like it's a personal issue. Someone feels personally offended. It could be that person in the firm is, not performing, and it's really just based on performance. So there's lots of different options there. I don't know if Sean, if you want to, expand on that and maybe give some more detail. But yeah, it's that's a good example. Some people says it can be no value. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Some people says it can be no value. I'm gonna continue forward, but maybe we can circle back to that later. So at this point, we've talked about the values, we've talked about the nature of choices and how we are constantly making choices and how that ties to our goals. And then I came up with this idea of the tree of values. Now, this is important too, because at any point in your life, there are multiple things that you're trying to get. And sometimes they can be competing with each other. And sometimes it can be difficult to know what is the biggest priority. And this I feel like helps. So in a tree, what makes it strong? The roots, right? The roots are what make the tree the strongest thing. And I got this from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a similar sort of concept. That's a very famous in psychology. But at the basic level, for any person to be successful, you have to have the root values, those critical values that are shared by all of humanity. So some of those are, you have to feel safe. You want a shelter, right? You don't want to feel like you have no money to buy food. Your health, your mental health, your physical health are in good shape. You have relationships, you have intimacy, you have love in your life. Most everyone needs these values. Most everyone needs these to be at least somewhat fulfilled, right? And that's one of the things that is a struggle. One of my clients, we spent months just first dealing with her, the fact that she was missing security as a core value in her life. It was very difficult for her to go to the next level, right? So once you have that, then you go to the core values. That builds the trunk of your tree. And this is what really separates people, right? Everyone's got a different trunk. The roots are generally the same for all people, you know, give or take a little bit, but the trunk is where you start to really define who you are, what drives you, what makes you you. And so for me, you know, I think about it, this is my tree, authenticity and freedom. Anytime I have those in my life, I feel good and balanced. And anytime that I don't feel like I have those, I start to feel out of whack. So I know that that is driving a lot of my decision making and a lot of my choices. And then, you know, you go, once you sort of figure that out, you can start expanding into the branches, as we say. And this is where you start getting your second, third, fourth degree values, the stuff that's important and matters to you. But you can only really address these when your trunk is strong, when your roots are strong. I feel like that's something that people miss too, is that they go in their life to try to become, I don't know, yeah, let's say entrepreneurs, or they try to be really successful in different areas of their career, but they've never really taken the time to even take care of their health. And so that gets in the way of those higher value goals. It's really difficult to be a successful entrepreneur if you're not healthy, for example, right? That's in my case. In my one client's case, she's a writer, and creativity was one of her core values, but she couldn't really be creative until she took care of that security and safety. That's what I mean about digging deeper. She was having trouble writing. She was having trouble. Another one of my clients, also creative, having trouble playing music. And then we dig deep and you say that they were limited not by their creativity, but they couldn't express that value because the lower level, more important root values were missing. And so that's how you sort of build it up. You start with that roots, then you go into the trunk, and then you go into the branches. But you have to understand, you know, what makes your trunk, what makes your branches, what makes your roots. You have to really understand that. So, you know, this is an example that I made. Another sort of fun exercise that I sometimes do in my coaching, and you guys can do it on your own as well, right? Try to think about what your tree looks like. Think about what, you know, creates your core value, what really makes you you, and then how that gets expanded up. I know, and I like a tree, the roots are the most critical, like we described. The trunk is what defines and separates us. But it's also important to understand that a tree grows, a tree changes. Just like your values can change. What is really important to you today might not have been what was important before. So it's an evolving, ever-changing process. You know, Maslow, in his studies, when he was talking about self-actualization, so self-actualization is being the best you can be. That's the way he described it. That was the tip of the pyramid. It's kind of like where this stuff begins. He says that only about 2% of the people in the world will ever get the opportunity to self-actualize. I don't know how true that is. You know, I'm not sure how exact that is, but it probably is kind of accurate. And I think it's a little bit unfortunate. But the main reason why people fail to do that is that A, they don't take care of their roots. That's like step one. And then from there, they don't really understand what makes their trunk. So they don't invest the energy and time into that. Any questions to this point? I know I kind of been talking a little bit more now. Any questions about this slide? Because the next slide, I think, is going to get to some of that other stuff that you guys were talking about earlier. But any questions about the tree of values or kind of basic stuff around values that we covered? Okay, so this is the tree of values. Now I'm going to go to the next part, and this is where it all comes together. Okay. This is the actual fruit. So for the engineers out there, here's your flow chart. So now it all makes perfect sense, right? It only makes sense once it's in a flow chart. Can you guys see that big? Or is my video blocking it?
It's all right.
You can read it? It's okay, good. All right, so I tried to put this whole concept now, all the stuff we've been talking about, the values and the choices that you make, into a flow chart to help make it really clear about how this actually works in real life, how this mechanism works. And I'll use the example of, I'll use a few examples here to really illustrate how this makes a difference in life. So the first part we've talked about, actually the first part is making a decision, which is really difficult for people. Make a decision that you want something better in your life. If you're not committed to that, none of this other stuff even matters, right? So that's always the first thing, is to make a decision. And that's tough. That can be really difficult. And then step 2, as we discussed earlier, identify the core values. So think about when you were really happy, when you were sad. You could use the eulogy, that's a whole process to really discover what's in the trunk of your tree. And I don't think, is it in my life? Is it not? And maybe you're not at the trunk level. Maybe you're at the root level. But you identify the value that is missing in your life that is most important to you. That's the first step. Then when you have that, you create an intention around that value. Anybody here ever made intentions? Ask that question. Anyone ever used affirmations or intentions? Do you guys know how they work? So I can explain it like this. Imagine you're at a party and it's loud, right? And there's music in the background, and you're sitting down, you're having a drink, or you're talking to someone close to you, and then you hear in the other room, Mehdi. It immediately breaks everything, right? It breaks your filter, and you hear it, even though there's a loud party and there's a lot going on. Just your name being said, even if it's far away, somehow draws your attention. And that's what intentions, that's the power of intentions. You probably heard of things like The Secret, and it's all these different books, like, put it out into the universe and it's going to come to you. Ask the universe for something and you'll get it. The way that actually works, in my opinion, is that when you create a strong intention, it breaks the filter. It breaks the filter and it helps you to recognize opportunities. So the intention that I had, so now I'm beginning to explain how this whole process of, becoming an entrepreneur worked for me. So as I didn't really have the formal intention when I did my MBA around freedom, but I knew that I needed to have freedom in my life. Like, that was a big part of it that was driving me. And then in my MBA, I had another really important intention. And this one was very clear. I said, I want to be involved as much as possible, because when I was an engineer, I wasn't involved. In Waterloo, I basically went to school and I kind of did my program, but I wasn't really a part of the community there. I didn't feel like I was a real, student. And so in the MBA, I wanted to be really involved. And so I set the intention of becoming really involved. And I got the award for it. I didn't even know there was an award, but I got the award for being the most involved student at the end. It was kind of a big deal. There was like 1,000 students at Schulich. It was, so it was a really important thing for me. But how did that work, right? I set the intention when I do the MBA, I want to become really involved. And I remember a specific moment where I recognized the opportunity to fulfill that intention. Every day there was an opportunity, because people would say, hey, do you want to come to this party, or do you want to go to this event? And I was like, yes, 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 I'm going to be involved. I'm going to say yes to everything. And it was really motivating that way. But I remember in particular, there was one event for SAMOS, the Schulich Association of Management and Organizational Studies. It's a mouthful, but it's basically the HR club, you could think of it. And so when I went to the MBA, I really fell in love with that. That's why I do these talks. That's why I do the coaching, I met Stephen Friedman there. He's one of the top 5 executive coaches in Toronto, and he motivated me and he mentored me. And so I realized I really wanted to be involved in that part of the world, that part of Schulich. So it was 6:30. I woke up from a nap. I was super tired, and there was a meeting at 7. My first instinct was, revert to my old habits. Just take a nap. How important could this meeting be? I'll just figure it out later. But because I'd made this strong intention, I didn't allow myself to do that. And I saw that in that moment, it was very clear. I either get up out of bed and I go to this meeting and I get closer to my intention of becoming really involved and becoming a member of Samos, or I get further away from it. And then I had to do it. Then I had to get up and I had to go. And going there is basically what allowed me to become a facilitator. It made a huge impact on my life. And it was one choice in that moment that the intention sort of forced me into doing. Now with Mapboard and More, it was similar in the sense because my intention around that was I wanted freedom, right? So, and to be clear, I didn't start Mapboard and More. I didn't have that intention. I mean, I don't know how to explain this, but like when I saw Mapboard and More, it was just a simple website. At that point, it had already been sort of like the basic level had started, right? My brother had made the website. But when I saw it, it wasn't just a website. It wasn't just a website that sold map boards or anything like that. For me, I recognized that website as a reflection of my intention to become more free in my life. It took on much bigger meaning. I actually could see my entire future as, working on this site and joining this business is going to lead to freedom. And from that moment, every decision that I made was framed as it's either going to get me closer to becoming free, which meant being successful at Mapboard and More, or it was going to get me further away. And so then I started going hardcore. At that point, I didn't know much about marketing, but I learned all about Google, SEO, PPC, all that kind of stuff. And we went full steam ahead with Mapboard and More. And every single day, every choice that I made was a reflection of my value of freedom, was a reflection of my intention to live a life that is free. So it wasn't about building a website. It wasn't about, making money. It wasn't about any of those things. It was about freedom, and the reflection of that core deep value was the website, if that makes sense. So when people ask me, like, what are the steps to becoming an entrepreneur? There are no clear steps. There are no A, B, C, D to become an entrepreneur. But you have to understand that if your goal is to be an entrepreneur, what is the value that is driving that? People do it for different reasons. I did it for freedom. And freedom manifested itself for me in the entrepreneurial way. And it was just this process. It was literally just doing this. Understanding freedom and then knowing that that's my intention helped me to recognize the opportunity. If I hadn't done that work beforehand, if I hadn't had the experience of working as an engineer and recognizing how painful it is to not be free, I'm pretty sure that I would not have looked at that website. I remember the day my brother showed me the website. He's like, I made this cool thing. I wouldn't have recognized it as an opportunity to change my entire life and adopt and cultivate that value of freedom. I would have just seen it as a cool website that my brother made. And I wouldn't have done anything about it. But here instead, what did I do? First day, I was on Twitter. I was on Facebook. I started using social media and I just started marketing the heck out of this thing. And I put all of my energy and focus into it because I recognized it as the opportunity that it was. And that's what the choices that you make in your life come down to, is knowing who you are, knowing what matters the most to you, so that when an opportunity comes, you can see it. And then the choice is so clear because you always know in your life, if I do A, I'm going to get closer to that intention. If I do B, I'm going to get further away. And so you can use this process in any goal that you want to achieve. And again, the best goals are not the ones that say, I want to start an e-commerce business and, I want it to be $multi-million and I want X, Y, Z. I never set a goal to do that. I set a goal that was based in my value, and then I lived every day making choices that would get me closer to that. So it's difficult, you know, to say that you want to start a business or you want, you know, one of these, whatever the goal might be. It's difficult. But what's more manageable and what's more attainable is to say that I want to bring this value into my life. And then you will start seeing all of the choices as a reflection of that. It's a reflection of getting you closer to your goal or further away. And if you just keep doing that every single day, every single moment, you know, then you will get there, because success is the habit of doing something every day that gets you closer to your intention. I firmly, firmly believe that. And that's what I also mean by you flip the script, right? It's not about a destination. It's not about a target. It's about a way of being. It's about the choices that we make every moment. If you just keep doing that process again and again and again, you will one day get to the point where the values that are most important to you are all present in your life. You cultivate them. Then you have alignment. You have alignment in your actions, in your beliefs, in your choices, and they're all aligned with your core values. That's fulfilling. That's, to me, what success looks like. The most challenging part of this is to identify what those core values are. That's really, really tough. It's really tough because we have so many thoughts in our head about what we should be doing or who we should be. And it's tough to be honest about it. Like, what do you actually want? What really matters to you? And once you figure that out, it starts to flow. You start seeing so many choices that you didn't even know you had. You start seeing opportunities for decisions that you did not realize existed. So Sean is asking me, is there a joy in this for you? Yeah. Yes. Heck yes. The most fulfilling time of my life. I mean, I feel great right now because I have the freedom now. You know what I mean? I have that. I've cultivated it. It's here. But one of the most exciting parts and the most fulfilling parts of my life was that process of like getting it, you know, living that goal every day, knowing that I was doing something for myself that was going to make me true to my values, that was going to get me to a point where I could be true to my values. And that has to be fun. That has, and when I say fun, I don't mean that it's not easy. It can be hard. But actually, sometimes the most joyful things in life are hard, right? There's a real joy in the challenge of it. There's a real joy in knowing that you're improving your life, that you're making conscious choices, that you're taking control. I think one of the hardest things in life is to feel powerless. And that's what sometimes these goal setting frameworks do. You put these goals out there that seem so great and so nice, but you have no idea how to achieve them. I promise you, if you set a goal not far, far away, but based on a value that you can live every day, it'll become so much more easy and more sustainable. So that's the values-based goal setting. That's how it all kind of comes together. So I think, so let's go back to a couple of the questions. Did I answer that question earlier? I think Shanji's, you had that question about opening a business, the challenges of it. Maybe it was somebody else, sorry. But did I answer that question now? I know it can seem a little bit, you know, large in general, but I promise you, this actually is very practical and it actually changes your moment to moment.
Yes, you did.
Okay. So let anybody
Thank
else,
you.
any other questions, anything else that maybe is not clear about this process? I'm going to take it one, just, this is really the crux. Everything else I've talked about, it comes down to this sort of flow chart and this process. This is what actually makes it work. So any questions on these things?
Sorry, may I ask, do we have a question answer section at the end, or we can continue in the middle of your work?
This is pretty much the end. I only have one more slide about coaching at the end of it. So, you know, we can do any Q&A stuff now, and then I'm going to wrap up with a summary.
Okay, I ask my question after that. Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else? So SMART, I'm going to put it in here. specific, measurable, action, realistic, timely. There's some different versions of SMART. So you might see some that are, say, relevant instead of realistic. But that's one of the most popular versions of SMART goals. So SMART goals are good. I actually want to make that clear. SMART goals are good when they're applied to your core values, right? When there's a real motivation behind them. Otherwise, you never really stick to them. Any other questions? So I want to mention too, that I guess before I sort of close it off, don't. What does that mean? What was your first instinct? I don't want to be too provocative, but what is that? What your first instinct is, F yourself. People sort of think of, I know the swear word. I promise you it's not that. But what is that what you first thought? Probably that's what you first thought. What did you think about after? What could you do?
Free
yourself. Okay.
Find yourself.
Find yourself. Find yourself. This always stuck with me. This is the coaching program that I have. It's called Find Yourself, but I do it this way.
I'm not sure about this one, but
it's to
furnish yourself.
So find yourself. And the reason I put this up is because this happened like 5 or 6 years ago, and it always stayed with me. There was a guy walking in the street, and he had on the front this F yourself. And I got I don't know why, I got really angry when I saw it. And I was like, what the hell? And I took it personally. And then he walked, and on the back of his shirt, it says, find yourself. And I was like, okay, I'm an idiot. Thank you for, showing me that I make assumptions too, that I have to challenge my beliefs. And I went really deep into it. I know it was just a shirt, but I feel like that's so important, right? Is to really challenge our beliefs, challenge what we believe in, challenge ourselves. And so this is just like a way to kind of trigger that our first instinct isn't always the right one. And most times it isn't. So in my coaching program, and if no one's ever done coaching before, I'll just give you a little bit of a explanation about what coaching is and how it works with this process. First thing you got to know about a coach, that a coach is not considered an expert in life. That's not the role of a coach, to be the expert and then, give you some answers to secrets. That's not at all what we do as coaches. What we do is we provide a safe, non-judgmental space that also is challenging to help you explore your own solutions, to help you explore these ideas about, what's important to me? What are my values? What are the choices that I make? What other choices could I have made? And so the coaching process, it's, asking questions. It's giving people an opportunity to, really dig deep and investigate those, to be challenged. And so if you want to be successful in the coaching relationship, most of it is really on the coachee itself. It's on their openness to learning, their openness to change, their openness to growth. And we just as coaches help facilitate that process. We're partners in that process, but the hard work and everything comes down to you. So in my coaching program, a lot of it is based on understanding our values and then using that process of the values-based goal system to cultivate those values. We usually do bi-weekly sessions. For Mohandas, I'm giving 3 free sessions as well. So if you want to check out my website later and shoot me a message, I'd be happy to, anybody here who wants to further themselves, who wants to better themselves, I'd be very happy to do 3 free sessions just to sort of get the ball rolling and get a feel for, how it works and if there's chemistry. So if you guys want to do that, I want to, let you know that opportunity is available for you as well to learn even more about these concepts. And, it's a very open-ended way of approaching, life challenges and setting goals. And I like that. So that is basically the conclusion of my seminar. I think I've went through all of the key points that I wanted to. So, I thank you all. I really appreciate the comments and the questions and the insights. I hope you got some of those takeaways. I hope it was an opportunity for you to reflect on your values and, understand that you have choices in your life and how that really does play into your ability to set goals. So I'll jump into the Q&A now. If people have questions, I will hopefully have answers, and you guys can also share with each other as well, ask questions to each other, because we can learn from the group.
Thank you, Mehdi, for the presentation. You can say, if you don't find yourself, then the other F word will apply, right?
That's good. That's good. That's a really good one. I'll remember that.
خب آقای now we can speak Farsi, right?
بله.
Okay. بسیار متشکرم. بسیار ممنون. پرزنتیشن فوق العاده جالب.
واقعا عالی بود.
عالی. آفرین بر شما.
عالی
راه مهندس مهدی خان.
دستتون در نکنه. مرسی به همه.
خیلی عالی، خیلی بسیار حظ بردیم و بسیار استفاده کردیم.
مرسی. کسی سوالی چیزی داره؟ من هستم.
بابا دیدم داره نیم متر بلند شده از قد کوچیکش. خیلی ماشاءالله 190.
بله. خب حالا آقای مهندس نوروزی میخواید یه فرصتی بدین 1-2 دقیقه آقای کجباف چند دقیقه استراحت کنه و بعد سوالتون بپرسید. آقای کجباف موافق هستید 2-3 دقیقه شما یه استراحتی بکنید، نفسی تازه بکنید و بعد
آره اوکی باش.
یه 2-3 دقیقه یک بریک کوچک و بعد دوستان غیر از آقای مهندس نوروزی اگه کسی هم سوال داره ما خوشحال میشیم که سوال دوستان رو پاسخ بدن. آقای مهندس کجباف، از اجازه بدید سلام عرض کنم حضور همه عزیزانی که تازه رسیدن. میبینم آقای اقتصادی، آقای دکتر مهاجر، آقای سعید، آقای سامان و دوستان عزیز دیگری که از راه رسیدن. بسیار خوشحال هستیم از زیارت شما. کانون مهندس ستاد همه مهندسانی است که در تورنتو زندگی میکنن، در اونتاریو و کانادا زندگی میکنن و ما میخواهیم که به انجمن به کانون مهندس بپیوندید و در این کانون که 34 سال به حیات پر افتخارش ادامه داده بپیوندید و ما رو در این امر یاری کنید به هر نحوی که میتوانید، چه در قلمی، قدمی و درمی، هر کدومش که باشه خوبه. آقای من ببینم که عزیزان هر کدوم که سوالی دارن میتونن سوالشون رو چیز بکنن. خانم سپهری شما اداره بکنید.
بله خواهش میکنم. بله لطفا ریز هند کنین به نوبت صدا.
آقای مهندس ببخشید من میشه خواهش کنم از جناب کجباف که از شیر اسکرین در بیان که ما بتونیم عزیزان رو داشته باشیم. مرسی.
آقای عزیز میتونید شما ریکوردینگ رو قطع کنید.
مرسی.
آقای مهندس نوروزی وقت گرفتن.
بله